My father humiliated me at my sister's graduation, calling me a mistake in front of a crowd. I walked away from my family for good. But years later, my sister reached out, terrified of them. "Hi Reddit, it's me, Lauren, and if there's one thing I've learned, it's that being born into a family doesn't mean you belong there. Some people fit seamlessly into the roles carved out for them, basking in love, approval, and golden opportunities. Others, like me, spend their whole lives as an afterthought, a background character in someone else's perfect story. I should have realized a long time ago that I was never going to matter to them. Maybe I did. Maybe I just didn't want to accept it. But the night of my younger sister's graduation, that was the night they finally said it out loud. I was a mistake, and they didn't even say it in private. No hushed voices behind closed doors. No accidental slip during an argument. No, they announced it in front of a room full of people. But let's back up. The morning of Delilah's graduation was tense from the moment I woke up. It always was when I had to be in the same room as my parents for an extended period of time. My mother, Celeste, had been up since dawn, barking orders at the house staff, ensuring everything was perfect. "Delilah, stand up straight. Fix your posture," she snapped as she zipped up my sister's custom-tailored white dress, adjusting the pearl necklace around her throat. The dress had been specially ordered from a Parisian designer, a one-of-a-kind piece that cost over $7,000 because a graduation is just as important as a wedding, according to my mother. Meanwhile, I stood in the doorway of my sister's bedroom, watching, waiting, dreading. My father, Victor, was downstairs, already dressed in an expensive charcoal suit that probably cost more than I made in a year. He wasn't a man who tolerated imperfection, and that extended to everything, including his children. "Lauren," my mother called, barely glancing at me. "Please tell me that's not what you're wearing." I looked down at my simple navy blue dress. It wasn't designer, but it was clean, ironed, and appropriate for the occasion. Celeste sighed dramatically, waving her hand dismissively. "At least put some effort into your hair. It looks flat. You already stand out enough as it is." I gritted my teeth, my fingers tightening around the doorframe. That was how it always was with her. Every comment was a needle, subtle enough to not be outright cruel, but sharp enough to sting. I wasn't presentable enough. I wasn't polished enough. I wasn't enough, period. Delilah turned from the mirror, giving me a slow once-over before shaking her head. "Lauren, you could try a little harder," she added, her voice light and sweet, but laced with that same condescension. "I mean, it's my big day. You don't want to embarrass yourself in front of all those people, right?" Embarrass myself. Not her. Not them. Just me. I had learned long ago that when my mother and sister talked about embarrassment, they meant my existence itself. I wanted to snap back, say something sharp and biting, but what was the point? Arguing with Delilah was like punching a cloud. No matter what I said, she would smile that knowing little smile, the one that said she had already won. Instead, I turned and walked away, ignoring the way Celeste sighed dramatically behind me, as if I had just made her life more difficult by existing. Downstairs, my father was standing by the fireplace, a glass of whiskey already in hand even though it wasn't even noon. He glanced up when he saw me, his expression unreadable. "You're not going to cause problems today, are you?" That was how Victor spoke to me. Not with affection, not even with the polite distance he gave to acquaintances. Just a constant undercurrent of exasperation. As if I were a troublesome employee he had no choice but to tolerate. "No, father," I said, my voice flat. He nodded once, satisfied. "Good. This day is about Delilah. Try to remember that." As if I could ever forget. Delilah was the favorite, the chosen one, the perfect daughter. She was everything I wasn't: elegant, beautiful, a reflection of everything my parents wanted their legacy to be. Me? I was the unwanted extra. I don't think I ever truly understood how deep that resentment ran until I was old enough to notice the financial difference between us. Delilah went to an elite private academy that cost over $50,000 a year. I attended a public school with peeling paint and overcrowded classrooms. Delilah had a custom-built vanity stocked with high-end makeup and skincare. I used whatever drugstore products I could afford with my part-time job. Delilah was gifted a brand new car for her 16th birthday, an Audi worth nearly $90,000. I was given a speech about the value of independence and handed the keys to a second-hand sedan with a busted air conditioner. They never even tried to hide it. At dinner, when I dared to bring up the fact that I might want to apply to an out-of-state university, Celeste had barely looked up from her wine glass. "That's an unnecessary expense, Lauren. We already have one child in college, and Delilah's education comes first." Victor nodded in agreement, as if the matter had already been settled. "You can go to the local community college. You don't need anything extravagant." Delilah had smirked across the table. "It's about being realistic, Lauren. Not everyone is meant for something bigger. Not everyone. Meaning me. I stopped expecting things after that. Presents, approval, love. By the time we arrived at the event hall for the graduation ceremony, I had already resigned myself to going through the motions. The hall was extravagant. Held in the city's most exclusive venue, it was all crystal chandeliers, gold-trimmed carpets, and floral arrangements that probably cost more than my car. I sat stiffly in the front row between my parents, watching the stage but not really seeing anything. Speeches blurred together. Words about bright futures and endless possibilities felt hollow to me because I knew those futures weren't for people like me. They were for people like her. I clapped when I was supposed to. I smiled when required. But inside, I felt cold. Then came the reception, the part one was dreading the most. A crowd had formed around Delilah as soon as we walked in. A mix of students, teachers, and wealthy parents eager to praise the perfect graduate. I tried to slip away, to find a quiet corner where I wouldn't have to pretend to belong. But Celeste grabbed my wrist, her nails digging into my skin. "You're not running off," she hissed under her breath. "At least try to behave for once." So I stood there, trapped beside them, while they basked in the attention. Then one of Victor's business associates, a man in a tailored suit with a drink in hand, smiled at us. "What a beautiful family," he said warmly. "You must be so proud of both your daughters." "Both. That was his mistake." Victor chuckled, shaking his head. "Oh, no, you misunderstand," he said, still grinning. "Delilah was planned. She's the future of this family." Then, without hesitation, without an ounce of remorse, he raised his glass higher. "But Lauren? She was an accident." Laughter rippled through the room. My mother took a slow sip of her champagne, smirking. "We only wanted one child," she added. "But, well, accidents happen. And that was it. That was the moment I knew, without a doubt, that I meant nothing to them." I moved through the reception, keeping my head down. All around me, people stood in small groups, talking and laughing like they were at some fancy gala instead of a high school graduation party. Waiters walked past, carrying trays of drinks and little plates of food that no one actually ate. Near the bar, my father was deep in conversation with a few of his business friends. They were all dressed the same, dark suits, expensive watches, the kind of people who only talked to each other when there was something to gain. "You must be so proud of Delilah," one of them said, raising his glass. Victor smiled. "She's always been exceptional." I walked faster. At the other end of the room, my mother stood with a group of women, all of them dressed in designer clothes. They leaned in close, whispering to each other in the way rich women did when they were pretending not to gossip. Celeste noticed me walking by and barely spared me a glance. "Lauren, at least try to fix your hair. You look unkempt." I ignored her. Delilah stood at the center of it all, exactly where she belonged. A group of her classmates surrounded her, all laughing at something she had said. She held a champagne flute in one hand, even though she was only 18. But rules didn't apply to Delilah, and no one would dare tell her otherwise. "God, this is so boring," one of the girls said, rolling her eyes. "Tell me about it," Delilah agreed. "I told my parents I wanted something small, but you know how they are." One of the guys smirked. "Yeah. A private event at the biggest venue in the city is super low-key." Delilah just shrugged. "What can I say? They love to show off. A man in a navy suit stepped closer, raising his glass. What a beautiful family. You must be so proud of both your daughters. Both. Victor laughed. Oh no, you misunderstand. Delilah was planned. She's the future of this family. He raised his glass slightly. Lauren, well, she was an accident. Laughter. Casual, effortless. Like he had just told a joke. Celeste sipped her drink, her lips curving into a small smile. We only wanted one child, but accidents happen. More laughter. No hesitation, no shock. No one even looked at me. I turned and walked out. The reception hall doors swung shut behind me, cutting off the noise. The hallway outside was empty, just a long stretch of polished floors and dim lighting. I stopped for a second, pressing my hands against my sides. My fingers were cold. My face was burning. Footsteps. Lauren. I didn't turn. Are you seriously doing this? Delilah's voice. Calm, controlled. I walked forward. You're so dramatic. Her heels clicked against the floor as she moved closer. Are you really mad about the toast? Dad was joking. I kept going. She stepped in front of me, blocking my way. You always do this. You act like everything's about you, like the world is out to get you or something. It's exhausting. I didn't say anything. She sighed, tilting her head. Maybe if you weren't so miserable all the time, Mom and Dad would actually like you. The slap landed before I even thought about it. The sound cut through the quiet hallway. Delilah touched her cheek, her fingers hovering over the skin. Her expression didn't change right away. Then, after a second, she smiled. Wow, she said. That was a mistake. I walked past her. I didn't stop. I walked fast, barely feeling the floor under my feet. My face was hot, my hands shaking, my whole body buzzing with something I couldn't name. The doors to the reception hall were still closed behind me, sealing off the world I wanted to leave behind. But I wasn't free. Not yet. My breath hitched. My hands curled into fists. Footsteps again. Lauren, Delilah called from behind me, her voice sharper now. Don't walk away from me. I kept going. She caught up, grabbing my wrist. Are you insane? I yanked my arm away. Her mouth twisted. You just embarrassed yourself in front of everyone. My chest rose and fell fast, too fast. You slapped me, she said, voice lower now, almost amused. What? You think that makes you some kind of badass? I swallowed hard, forcing down the lump in my throat. You've always been pathetic, but this? She gave a small shake of her head. You're gonna regret that. I forced myself to meet her eyes. No, I said, my voice tight. I regret not doing it sooner. She scoffed. You're a joke. Something inside me cracked. Really? I said louder than I meant to. I'm a joke? Because I wasn't the one who just stood there while Dad told a room full of people that I was never supposed to exist. Her expression barely shifted. She only lifted a shoulder in a careless shrug. So? It's not like you didn't already know. My whole body tensed. Mom and Dad don't love you, Lauren, she said, like she was talking about the weather. They tolerate you. You're just there. I knew that. I had always known that. But hearing her say it so plainly, like it was obvious, like it wasn't even cruel, something in me shattered. My hands were trembling. I didn't want her to see. I turned away and kept walking. Go ahead, she called after me. Run away. That's all you're good at. My legs moved faster. I pushed open the heavy doors at the end of the hall and stepped outside. The night air hit me, cool against my burning face. The parking lot stretched ahead, empty except for a few sleek black cars. A valet stood near the curb, scrolling through his phone. I needed to leave. I pulled my phone out of my bag, fingers shaking too much to unlock it. My breath came in short, uneven bursts. The doors behind me opened again. You're not really leaving, Delilah said from the doorway. I didn't answer. She let out a laugh, but there was no real humor in it. Where are you even gonna go? I gripped my phone tighter. She took a step forward. Mom and Dad aren't gonna care if you leave, you know. They're probably relieved. I already knew that. You don't have any money, she said. You don't have a plan. What are you gonna do? Sleep in your crappy car? My throat felt tight. She tilted her head. You'll come crawling back. I turned around and met her eyes. I'd rather die. For the first time that night, she didn't have a response. I walked away. I walked across the parking lot, my steps unsteady. The night was quiet, but my head wasn't. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I reached my car, if you could even call it that. The faded blue paint was chipped along the edges, and one of the side mirrors was taped on. The air conditioning barely worked, and the back seat smelled like the old fast food wrappers I never got around to throwing away. I opened the door and sat inside, gripping the steering wheel with both hands. My breaths were sharp and uneven. My face was still hot. My cheek felt tight, like it was holding back tears I refused to let fall. I wasn't going back in there. But where was I supposed to go? I had $320 in my bank account. That wasn't enough to get out of town, let alone start a new life. Rent anywhere decent was impossible, and I knew for a fact that my parents weren't going to let me back in once I left. I didn't have a plan. I had nothing. The doors to the event hall opened again. I saw her through the windshield, standing under the golden lights of the entrance. Delilah. She wasn't smiling anymore. For a second, she just stood there, watching me. Then, she pulled her phone from her bag, tapped something on the screen, and held it to her ear. My phone buzzed in the passenger seat. I ignored it. It buzzed again, and again. I grabbed it, swiping to decline the call. A second later, a message popped up. Delilah, you're not gonna do it. I stared at the words on the screen. Another message. Delilah, you don't have the guts. I locked my phone and threw it into the passenger seat. My hands clenched into fists on my lap. I wasn't staying here. I turned the key in the ignition. The engine sputtered before finally catching. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, staring straight ahead. The road stretched into the dark, leading anywhere but here. I put my foot on the gas, and I drove. I drove past dark houses and empty streets, my hands gripping the wheel. The gas gauge was low, the warning light glowing on the dashboard. I had no plan, no destination, no clue what I was doing. I just knew I wasn't going back. The road stretched ahead, quiet except for the occasional car passing in the other direction. My phone vibrated in the passenger seat. I ignored it. Then it vibrated again. And again. I glanced at the screen. Delilah. I let it ring. A text popped up. Delilah. Running away like a coward. Classic. Another one. Delilah, you'll be back. I turned the phone face down. The gas station up ahead was the only thing open. The neon lights flickered, and a single car was parked outside the small convenience store. I pulled in, the brakes making a faint screech. My fingers dug into my pocket as I stepped out, pulling out my wallet. I checked the cash. $9. That wasn't enough for a full tank. It wasn't enough for anything. I shoved the wallet back into my pocket and walked toward the store. The automatic doors slid open, and the blast of fluorescent light made me squint. The cashier barely glanced up from his phone. Some guy in a jacket stood by the fridges, taking his time picking a drink. The place smelled like old coffee and cleaning supplies. I grabbed a small bottle of water and a granola bar. Cheap, something to hold me over. I brought them to the counter. The cashier scanned them lazily. That all? I nodded. $3.79. I pulled out a crumpled $5 bill and slid it across the counter. The register dinged as he pulled out change. As I reached for it, the doors opened behind me. I didn't turn around, but I heard the steps. A voice behind me. Figures I'd find you here. I tensed. Delilah. I grabbed the change and shoved it into my pocket before picking up the water and granola bar. I turned around, walking toward the door without answering her. She followed. What's the plan, Lauren? Gonna live out of your car? I pushed the door open and stepped outside. She kept talking. You don't have money. You don't have friends. You have nowhere to go. I walked to my car, unlocking it. Delilah leaned against the hood. Mom and Dad aren't going to come looking for you, you know? I opened the door. She crossed her arms. You're just proving them right. I stopped. My fingers tightened on the door handle. She smirked. What? No comeback? That's a first. I exhaled through my nose. Go home, Delilah. She didn't move. You think you're making some big statement by running away? They don't care, Lauren. They probably haven't even noticed you're gone. I clenched my jaw. She shrugged. Whatever. I'll see you in a few days when you crawl back. I got into the car and slammed the door. She watched as I started the engine. I backed out and pulled onto the road. I didn't look back. The gas station faded into the distance as I drove down the empty road. The glow from the streetlights barely reached my windshield, leaving most of the highway in darkness. My hands gripped the wheel, my heartbeat still fast from Delilah showing up. I hadn't expected that. I thought I was done with her for the night, but of course she had to follow me. She always did. Not out of concern, never out of concern. She just wanted to see me fail. The gas gauge dipped lower. I wasn't going to make it far. I spotted an exit sign for a rest stop up ahead. I pulled off, coasting into the nearly empty parking lot. The car rolling to a stop near a row of vending machines. Only one other vehicle was parked there. A beat-up pickup truck. Engine off, windows rolled up. No one was around. The place was quiet except for the occasional hum of a passing truck on the highway. I killed the engine and sat back against the seat. My eyes burned, my body heavy. I didn't know what time it was. Probably past midnight. I pulled out my phone, checking my notifications. 12 missed calls. 5 from Delilah. 3 from my mother. 4 from an unknown number that I knew was my father's office line. I stared at the screen. For a second, a small part of me hoped that maybe they were worried, that maybe one of those voicemails had something real in it. Not anger, not disappointment, just something. I hesitated before playing the first one. My mother's voice filled the car, clipped and annoyed. Lauren, you've made your point. Now come home before you make this worse for yourself. I deleted it. The next one was my father. I don't know what childish game you're playing, but you're embarrassing yourself. This is not how you handle things, Lauren. Deleted. Delilah's voice came through in the third one, light and mocking. God, you're so predictable. Running away? What are you, 15? A pause. You'll be back. You always come back. I deleted that one too. I scrolled past the rest, not bothering to listen. I already knew what they said. Come home. Stop being dramatic. You're making a fool of yourself. It was never about me. It was about the way I made them look. I locked my phone and tossed it onto the passenger seat. The silence in the car pressed against me. I ran a hand through my hair, letting out a slow breath. I had nowhere to sleep, barely any money, and no plan. But I wasn't going back. I cracked the window slightly, letting in the cool air. The vending machines glowed a few feet away. I grabbed the granola bar from earlier and took small bites, trying to make it last. My stomach was tight, hunger mixing with the exhaustion creeping into my bones. The night stretched on, and I knew sleep wasn't coming. I kept replaying everything in my head. My father's voice, my mother's dismissal, Delilah's smirk, the laughter, the toasts, the way they all agreed without saying it outright. Lauren was a mistake. I leaned my head against the seat and closed my eyes. I just needed to make it through the night. The night dragged on. The car was cramped, the seatbelt digging into my side no matter how I shifted. Couldn't sleep. My body was exhausted, but my brain wouldn't shut off. I kept thinking about everything. Delilah showing up at the gas station, my father's voice on the voicemail, my mother's complete lack of concern. None of it surprised me, but it still hurt. A semi-truck rumbled into the rest stop parking lot, its headlights sweeping across my windshield. The driver parked a few spaces away, climbed out, stretched, and disappeared inside the restroom. I watched for a second before looking away. I pulled my phone out of the cup holder. 2:47 a.m. My battery was at 19%, and I didn't have a charger with me. I should have planned this better. I should have grabbed more money, packed a bag, figured out somewhere to go. But I hadn't been thinking. I had just needed to leave. I tapped my banking app. The balance hadn't magically changed. $9.74. I exhaled sharply and leaned my head back. I had enough gas left for maybe another 30 miles before I was completely stranded. My stomach twisted. I hadn't eaten anything since earlier, and the granola bar had barely done anything. I thought about using some of the cash for something from the vending machine, but I needed every dollar. My phone buzzed in my lap. I expected it to be Delilah again, but when I glanced at the screen, it wasn't her. It was my sister, Emma. I hesitated. Emma never called me this late. Unlike Delilah, she actually had a soul, but she was still part of that house, part of that world. She had always been quiet, the one who stayed out of the way. She never stood up for me, but she never laughed at me either. The phone buzzed again. I answered. There was a pause on the other end before her voice came through, small and hesitant. Lauren, I swallowed. Yeah. She exhaled, like she had been holding her breath. Where are you? Why? A pause. Then softer. I wanted to make sure you're okay. I looked out the windshield. The parking lot was still, the truck driver nowhere in sight. The vending machine lights buzzed faintly. I'm fine, I said. Another pause. Then, Mom and Dad are pissed. I let out a dry, humorless breath. Of course they are. They're trying to act like they don't care, but I can tell they do. She hesitated. Not because they're worried. They just don't like that you're making them look bad. I already knew that. Emma was quiet for a long time before she finally said, I'm sorry. I frowned. For what? For never saying anything. For never standing up for you. Her voice cracked slightly. It's not fair how they treat you. My throat felt tight. I swallowed it down. It doesn't matter, I said. It does. Silence stretched between us. Then, Emma said something I didn't expect. I want to leave too. I sat up straighter. What? I can't stay here, she said, voice barely above a whisper. I don't want to end up like them. I blinked, gripping the phone tighter. I don't know how yet, but when I figure it out, I'm leaving. Another pause. Just like you. Something in my chest ached. I closed my eyes for a second before saying, Then do it before they decide your whole life for you. I will. Neither of us said anything for a while. Then Emma exhaled. Where are you going to go? I stared out at the empty highway. I don't know, I admitted. Lauren. She hesitated. Do you want me to send you some money? I closed my eyes, my jaw tightening. I wanted to say yes. I needed to say yes, but I couldn't take anything from that house. No, I said. Emma didn't push. Another stretch of silence. Then, her voice softer. Just promise me you'll be safe. I exhaled. I'll be okay. She didn't sound convinced. We didn't say goodbye. We just sat there, neither of us wanting to hang up. When the call finally ended, I was alone again. But it didn't feel the same. For the first time since leaving, I didn't feel completely lost. The call with Emma stayed in my head long after I hung up. I hadn't expected it, hadn't expected her to say any of that. She had always blended into the background, never getting involved, never drawing attention to herself. I thought she didn't care, but she did. And now she wanted to leave too. I sat in the driver's seat, staring at my phone until the screen dimmed. 15% battery. I had to figure something out. I looked around the rest stop. It was empty except for the parked truck and the glowing vending machines. I could stay here until morning, but then what? I didn't have enough gas to get anywhere far, and I sure as hell wasn't going to sleep in a parking lot for the next week. I pulled up my contacts, scrolled, stopped on a name. Nina. I hadn't spoken to her in months. She had been my best friend in high school, the only person I could actually talk to. But after graduation, she moved to another city, and we drifted apart. Not for any big reason, life just happened. I stared at the screen. I had no right to ask her for help. But I didn't have many options. I tapped the call button before I could overthink it. The phone rang twice before clicking. A groggy voice answered. Lauren. I let out a breath. Hey, Nina. She paused, probably checking the time. It's almost 4 in the morning. You okay? I gripped the steering wheel. Not really. She was more awake now. What's wrong? Where are you? I hesitated, then said, I left home. Silence. Then, like, for good. Yeah. She didn't respond right away. I waited, bracing myself for the questions, for the judgment. Instead, she said, Where are you right now? A rest stop off the highway. Do you have somewhere to go? No. Another pause. Then, come here. I blinked. What? Come stay with me, she said like it was obvious. I have a couch. It's not great, but it's better than sleeping in your car. A lump formed in my throat. Nina, I can't. Yes, you can. I swallowed hard. I don't have gas money. She sighed. Send me your location. I'll come get you. My chest tightened. I had expected her to hesitate, to say she couldn't help, to tell me she was sorry but there was nothing she could do. That's what I was used to. But Nina wasn't like my family. Okay, I said quietly. I sent my location. Sit tight, she said. I'll be there soon. The call ended. For the first time all night, I let myself breathe. I sat in the car, waiting. The parking lot was still empty except for the truck parked a few spaces away. The vending machines hummed under the flickering lights. The sky was getting lighter, a deep shade of blue instead of black. Morning was coming. I checked my phone. 8% battery. I had turned it on airplane mode to save power, but it didn't matter much. As soon as Nina got here, I could charge it at her place. I could shower. I could sleep in a real bed or at least a couch. I still couldn't believe she was actually coming. After everything, after years of feeling like no one would ever choose me, Nina had answered in the middle of the night and said, I'll come get you. No hesitation. No questions. Just where are you? I rubbed my eyes. They burned, but I wasn't crying. I had done enough of that in my life. Headlights appeared in the distance. A car turned off the highway into the rest stop, slowing as it approached. I sat up straighter, pulled into the space next to mine, and Nina leaned over the console, looking through the passenger window. I unlocked my door and got out as she did the same. She looked me up and down. Jesus, Lauren. I let out a short breath. I know. She didn't ask questions. She just opened the trunk. Put your stuff in here. I hesitated. I don't have anything. She frowned, closing the trunk. Not even a bag? I shook my head. Okay, she said like she was processing it. Then she opened the passenger door. Get in. I got in. The warmth of the car heater hit me instantly. It smelled familiar, like Nina's vanilla-scented air freshener and old coffee. She always had coffee in here. She pulled back onto the highway. We didn't talk at first. The road stretched ahead, and I watched as the sky slowly brightened. The city was still far, but at least I had somewhere to go now. Finally, she said, You gonna tell me what happened? I rested my head against the window. They finally said it out loud. She glanced at me. Said what? That I was a mistake. Her fingers tightened slightly on the wheel. They actually said that? I nodded. Assholes. I almost smiled. She sighed, shaking her head. I always knew your parents sucked, but... She trailed off. It doesn't matter, I said. She scoffed. Yeah, it does. Silence again. Then she asked, So, what's the plan? I exhaled. I don't have one. Well, she said, you do now. You're staying with me. I turned to look at her. I can't just... Yes, you can, she interrupted. I'm not letting you sleep in a parking lot, Lauren. I swallowed hard. I don't have money. You'll figure it out, she said simply. And until you do, you have a place to stay. I didn't know what to say. After everything, after spending my whole life feeling like no one wanted me, Nina just did. I turned back toward the window, watching the road. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone. Nina's apartment was small, but it was warm, and it was safe. I sat on her couch, holding a cup of coffee she had shoved into my hands the second we walked in. My body ached from being in the car all night, and my head was still spinning, but for the first time in hours, I felt like I could breathe. Nina sat across from me, her arms crossed. All right, so what's next? I stared into the coffee. I don't know. You need a job, she said. And some cash. How much do you have? $9. She winced. Okay. That's not great. No kidding. She pulled out her phone and started scrolling. Alright, let's see. You can crash here as long as you need, but you gotta get something lined up. Maybe a diner or retail. Something easy to start with. I'll take anything, I said. Good. I have a friend who manages a coffee shop. I'll text her. I nodded, sipping the coffee. She looked at me for a second before asking, You gonna tell me what really happened back there? I exhaled. My dad humiliated me in front of 100 people. My mom didn't care. Delilah told me I was nothing. So I left. She leaned back. And now they're blowing up your phone? They called a few times, but not because they care. They're just mad I made them look bad. Nina rolled her eyes. Screw them. I swallowed hard. Emma called me. She raised an eyebrow. Emma? Since when does she call you? Since last night. She said she wants to leave too. Nina sat forward. Seriously? Yeah. I hesitated. She's still figuring it out. But she wants out. Nina nodded slowly. Good for her. Silence settled between us. Then she said, You're really not going back? I shook my head. Never. She smiled. Good. The reality of it all was hitting me. I had nothing. No money, no job, no plan. But I had one thing I never had before. A real chance to start over. A few hours later, Nina's apartment felt a little less like a stranger's place and a little more like somewhere I belonged. I had showered, borrowed some clothes from her, and eaten an actual meal. Instant ramen, but it was the best thing I'd had in days. I sat at her kitchen table while she scrolled through job listings on her laptop. My phone was charging next to me, but I hadn't checked it since plugging it in. I already knew what I'd see. More missed calls, more voicemails, more messages from people who didn't actually care about me. Just about the fact that I left. Okay, Nina said. There's a diner down the street hiring servers. They don't require experience, and they do under-the-table pay until you're officially on the books. Want me to call? I nodded. Yeah, I'll take anything at this point. She clicked on the listing and pulled out her phone. A few minutes later, she was off the call and grinning. You start tomorrow. I blinked. That fast? They're desperate, she said. Guess some girl walked out mid-shift last night. Anyway, show up at 10. They'll train you. I let out a slow breath. A job. A real one. I wasn't making some grand career move, but at least I wouldn't be stuck sitting around with no money. You good? Nina asked. Yeah, I said. It's just a lot. She closed her laptop and leaned forward. Look, you don't have to do everything all at once. You left that shitty house. That's step 1. Now you've got a job. That's step 2. Just keep moving forward, one thing at a time. I nodded, letting her words sink in. My phone vibrated. I glanced at the screen. Emma. I picked it up and answered. Hey, Lauren. She breathed, relief in her voice. I've been trying to call you all morning. Yeah, sorry. My phone was dead. Are you okay? I'm fine. She hesitated. Mom's pissed. Dad too. They keep saying you'll come crawling back. I scoffed. They can keep waiting. There was a pause. Then Emma lowered her voice. Lauren, I need to ask you something. I sat up straighter. What? She hesitated again, then finally said, If I left, would you help me? A beat passed. Then, without thinking, I said, Yeah, I would. Emma exhaled, shaky but determined. Okay. I didn't know when or how, but she was gonna leave just like I had. And when she did, I'd be there. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of Nina moving around in the kitchen. The smell of coffee filled the apartment. I sat up, stretching, my body sore from sleeping on the couch. It wasn't the most comfortable thing in the world, but it was better than my car. For the first time in forever, I had actually slept through the night. Nina poked her head out from the kitchen. You up? Yeah. Good. You start in an hour, so get moving. She pointed to a stack of clothes on the armrest. I found some stuff you can wear to work. Might be a little big, but it'll do. I grabbed the clothes and went to the bathroom. My reflection in the mirror looked different. Tired, but not broken. I changed, washed up, and tied my hair back before heading to the kitchen. Nina slid a mug of coffee toward me. Drink up. You're about to deal with rude customers, bad tips, and a manager who probably doesn't give a crap about anything but making sure people show up. I took a sip. Sounds great. She grinned. Welcome to the real world. The diner was small, tucked between a laundromat and a pawn shop. The windows were covered in old neon signs advertising burgers and bottomless coffee. The inside smelled like grease and burnt toast. A woman in her 50s stood behind the counter, wiping it down with a rag. Her name tag read Margot. She had tired eyes and a no-nonsense expression. You the new girl? She asked, barely glancing up. Yeah, Lauren. She nodded. All right, put on an apron, don't piss off the regulars, and if you break anything, you clean it up. Got it. Got it. She tossed me an apron and gestured toward a girl stacking plates onto a tray. That's Becca. She'll show you what to do. Becca turned, looking me up and down before nodding. Follow me. I spent the next few hours running around, refilling coffee, taking orders, and trying not to drop plates. The work was exhausting, but it felt good. I wasn't sitting in that house waiting for someone to acknowledge me. I wasn't being ignored at some fancy party. I was moving, doing something. Halfway through my shift, I took a break in the alley behind the diner. The air was cool, the sound of traffic humming in the distance. I pulled out my phone and checked my messages. One new text. Emma, I'm ready. My stomach tightened. I typed back. When? Her response came fast. Tonight. I swallowed hard. I had barely figured my own life out, and now Emma was throwing herself into the unknown too. But I wasn't going to let her do it alone. I texted back. Tell me where to meet you. She sent an address. I locked my phone and exhaled slowly. Emma was really doing this, and I was going to help her. The sun had already set by the time my shift ended. My feet ached. My clothes smelled like coffee and grease, but I didn't have time to think about any of that. Emma was waiting. I grabbed my phone and checked the address she had sent. It was a few miles outside the city, near the edge of our hometown. I knew the area. Big houses, long driveways, places where rich people pretended their lives were perfect. It made sense. My parents wouldn't want anyone in their social circle knowing one of their daughters was sneaking out in the middle of the night. Nina was waiting outside her car, arms crossed. You sure about this? I nodded. I told her I'd help. She sighed but didn't argue. Then let's go. The drive back felt different than when I had left. This time I wasn't running. I was going back to take someone with me. The roads were quiet, lined with expensive houses set too far back from the street. I clenched my hands together in my lap. I had no idea what Emma was bringing, how much time we had, or if my parents had any idea what she was doing. Nina parked a block away. You should go alone, she said. Less attention. I nodded and got out. The house was dark except for a light in Emma's window. I moved quickly, staying close to the shadows. A few seconds later, the window slid open. Emma climbed out, struggling with a backpack. She looked smaller than I remembered. You okay? I whispered. She nodded, breathless. Yeah, just help me get this stupid bag through. I reached up and took it from her. She climbed down carefully, her shoes hitting the grass without a sound. She was shaking. Let's go, I said. She didn't move right away. She looked back at the house, hesitation flickering across her face. I knew what she was thinking. She had grown up there. Everything she knew was behind those walls. The same people who had ignored me my whole life had done the same to her, just in a quieter way. You don't have to do this, I said. Her jaw tightened. Yes, I do. We ran. By the time we got back to the car, her hands were still shaking. Nina pulled onto the road without asking questions. You got everything? I asked. Emma nodded. Yeah. Not that they'll notice anything's missing. I stared at her. They really don't care? She let out a breath. Dad's out of town. Mom's probably drunk. Delilah? I don't know. She's too busy with her perfect life to worry about me. I looked out the window. Good. We drove in silence for a while, leaving the neighborhood behind. Emma sat quietly, gripping the straps of her backpack like they were the only thing keeping her steady. Finally, Nina spoke. "So, what's the plan?" Emma looked at me. "You tell me." I thought about it. I had no money, no solid plan. But I had a job now. I had Nina. And now I had Emma too. "We start over," I said. Emma nodded. For the first time in both our lives, we were free.